Welcome to Sugar Mama's Fireplay, the podcast that helps you build financial independence, create long-term wealth, and protect your financial future with smart, mindful money decisions. I am your host, financial planner, Canna Campbell. In today's episode, we're tackling something that has sparked a lot of concern, even fury, in the financial world. That is the proposed 30% tax on unrealised capital gains inside superannuation for account balances over $3 million. Now, I know that number may sound far away for a lot of people, including myself, but this proposal has serious implications for all Australians, not just those with large super account balances. You see, this potential tax, this change in rules, actually represents a major shift in how our wealth could be taxed and even erode away. And we need to understand what this actually means for us and our long-term financial security and retirement strategies. Now, this episode is not just for people with self-managed super funds or high balances. This is for superannuation account holders, like you and I, everyday people. And of course, everyone or anyone who actually wants to understand and protect their financial future, particularly if they do plan on having a long, luxurious and secure retirement. So let's get into this straight away. Welcome back, everyone. As explained, we're going to talk about this proposed superannuation tax. Now, what exactly is this? So, Labor is proposing from the 1st of July in 2025, super balances above $3 million will face an extra 15% on unrealised gains. The controversial part here is the word unrealised. The unrealised gains are going to be taxed. So what this means is, even if you don't actually sell your asset within super or even receive any income, for example, your superannuation owns, say, a property and it grows $100,000 just over the $3 million mark, and say it's gone from being $3 million to say $3.1 million, so you've got a $100,000 gain, you might have to come up with an additional $30,000 in tax without actually having to sell that property or even receive necessarily any rental income from that property. So this isn't just like a tax increase, it's actually a change in the underlying definition of taxable income, because normally you only pay capital gains tax when you actually sell that asset. This is an unrealised definition, and this is the biggest concern and worry, and really what is making me really frustrated and angry. Because what it does is it undoes all the trust, all the attractiveness, and the value that has been built since superannuation began in the early 90s. Now, why is this so dangerous? And is this really setting a precedent? Well, yes, I think so. You see, Australia's tax system has always been built around realised gains. So, you only once you had the money in your actual pocket after selling. So, for example, you buy a property for, say, $400,000 and then you go and sell it, say, 5 years later for, say, $600,000. You've technically made a $200,000 capital gain, and you would only pay tax on that gain once you have sold it, and you would pay tax on that $200,000 gain depending on your, how long you'd held the asset for, where it's held, and of course your marginal tax rate. Now, if this is passed by the Senate, this could actually completely change the system, because what it is allowing for taxation to be triggered on paper wealth, not real wealth. So even though you haven't sold that asset, I'll use that example again of that $400,000 asset, even though it isn't actually technically applicable because we're talking about $3 million balances here. But in that example I just used, what this is saying is, well, yes, that property you bought for $400,000 is now worth $600,000. Even though you haven't sold it, we're going to tax you anyway. So this is the frustrating part. You are still expected to pay some tax because of the perceived value. Now, if this is passed and it's put into place, it could spread to investment properties outside of super. It could include business assets, share portfolios, Potentially the family home. This is a slippery slope. You see, once this mechanism exists, the future governments can expand it. So think of it as like winning the lottery or being taxed on winnings for the lottery before your actual numbers have been drawn. This is not a wealth tax, it's a fear tax. And at the end of the day, does this tax actually encourage us to work hard, contribute to our super, and actually feel empowered about our financial future? Hell no, it certainly doesn't. And this is seriously destructive, dangerous, and a huge concern for so many people within my industry as well as everyday Australians. So let's go and talk about the impact it has on self-managed super funds, which I see as the biggest worry. Now, a lot of self-managed super funds hold illiquid assets. And that was probably one of the main reasons why they used a self-managed super fund, because of that, flexibility. And they, things like property, business premises like commercial property, private equities, including startups, and then farmers. There are a lot of farmers who actually own their farms within the self-managed super fund. Now, these types of assets cannot actually be sold easily to go and pay those tax bills. What this could mean is, if this is passed and a farmer gets hit with a bill and the farmer is a trustee of the self-managed super fund, they could be forced to sell that entire farm to cover that tax bill for that year on a gain that they haven't actually received. Now, this is another problem that comes in this. There's a huge administration nightmare. How are we going to actually understand the valuations? This is really difficult. How do you value a farm? How do you value a startup, particularly, where it is in its journey and the risks it's taken and the debt and so forth? This is really difficult, and this is also incredibly expensive. You would really need to get a highly skilled accountant with a really niche, expertise to be able to do that. It would be incredibly expensive and also incredibly inconsistent. How can you actually know the true value of an asset if it isn't actually being sold? There's no one actually saying, I'll give you $4 million for that, or $3 million for that, or $9 million for that. How do we understand the true value? What is the formula that we're going to be able to use here? And the other big issue, which is particularly around startups, which a lot of, the big superannuation funds actually have exposure to, is the volatility. A business might be worth nothing when it first starts up, but it, hits gold, particularly maybe technology, has put a huge amount of money into it, and then all of a sudden it's gone from being worth nothing to, say, $30-40 million. That's how the volatility can exist for a lot of these, venture capitalists. So how are we going to cope with that? Does that mean the whole business gets sold? Imagine owning a residential investment property inside a self-managed super fund that you set up, and it increases in value due to inflation, and that just tips you over that $3 million threshold. But you don't want to sell it, but you're still receiving a massive tax bill, and then you don't actually have the cash within your super to actually fund that annual tax bill. So what does that mean? Well, you don't have the cash to pay the tax bill, you're over the $3 million threshold. You're going to have to sell that entire property now. What are you going to do? You can't sell the front door, the bedroom, the backyard. You're going to have to sell that entire property, which then triggers additional fees and expenses like agents' commissions, marketing expenses, legal, and so on. And now your property that you worked so hard for in your self-managed super fund, you're out of the market. You've completely changed the investment strategy thanks to this tax. Now, this problem continues on. It doesn't just stop there. It's actually potentially going to destroy the investment cycle. You see, a lot of investors actually leverage growth to reinvest, equity in property or shares. And taxing before it actually has been realized completely destroys this strategy. It completely penalizes that strategic long-term thinking and planning when it comes to wealth accumulation. And it also encourages this knee-jerk short-term terminism and liquid assets. Doesn't actually uphold long-term financial stability, security, and independence, which is really concerning. The other thing we need to think about is this $3 million figure is not indexed, and there doesn't seem to be much agreement around considering indexing it. Now, $3 million, yes, it is a lot of money to have in superannuation. And, if you've got $3 million in super, you've worked hard, you've done well, you've made some great decisions. Now, if this stays in place and is not indexed, over the next 20, 30 years, more and more of us will actually have $3 million super. And if you've ever played around with my superannuation calculators on my website, you'll see that a $3 million superannuation account balance isn't unfathomable. Hard work, dedication, commitment, you could have a $3 million in super. And then you factor in things like inflation, compounding returns, regular contributions, your super guarantee, which is now approaching 12% from the 1st of July. More and more people are going to hit this threshold, which includes younger investors. Younger investors who have made brilliant, smart investment decisions. You could hit that $3 million far sooner than you realize. And then what about women? Women who have previously been impacted by super, working so hard to now build up their super, consistently contributing, investing, making great decisions, getting quality advice. They could also be caught up in this. Imagine that. You work so hard to get your super back on track, and then you get penalized. This disproportionately impacts responsible investors like you and me, and it is so fucking messed up. Now, the AMP Deputy Chief Economist, Diana Musina, she did some modelling, and she actually showed that the average 22-year-old is actually going to be hit by this exact tax by the time they go to retire. So if you're thinking this is not going to be something your kids need to worry about, or grandkids, or even like you are so wrong. We've all got to wake up and put our hands up in the air and jump up and down so this doesn't actually get passed. There's also the psychological damage here, and being the impact on our confidence and our fucking trust in superannuation. And I'm sorry to swear, but this is just disgraceful. I feel like this is like daylight robbery that's happening right now. So superannuation was designed to be predictable. It was designed to be for the long term, and it was also designed to be fair. There's also the obvious. This was designed to actually make people be financially independent, not rely on the government. So destroying people's superannuation seems completely counterintuitive. But anyway, all right, I digress. So superannuation, back when it was created in the early 90s, was designed to empower people like you and I to create our own financial independence and to take control of our money, because we can pick where that money is invested. This rule change mid-game makes me, and I think everyone else, feel unsafe. It feels erratic and it feels cruel. It's like a fucking punishment. Australians may react in a really negative way, and that is pull their money out of superannuation if they can, which could weaken the entire system. They could pull money out of property, money out of the share market, money out of the Australian economy. The economy, our economy, and that would then impact our productivity and growth. And to be honest, if you're one of these people that's thinking, yeah, that's what I was thinking of doing, Canna, I don't blame you for thinking like that. It's not what I'm obviously recommending, but you start to think, well, okay, what should I be doing elsewhere? Because I definitely don't want to maintain this commitment to my sexy superannuation, because it's certainly not looking as sexy anymore if this does get passed. So if people stop trusting the rules, they start looking for ways outside of the system. Money will go offshore. People will start utilising family trusts and private lending. The damage done to our economy could be irreparable, all because of this one stupid change in rules. Superannuation is a little bit like a marriage between you and your retirement. If you keep changing the rules, you start to wonder whether it's worth actually staying in the relationship anymore. And as angry as I am, I don't want anyone's eyes wondering, because under the current system as it is today, without this stupid rule in place, superannuation is still sexy. It helps create financial stability. It also takes away temptation to go and blow that money and spend that money when it's for our long-term financial security, freedom and independence. So why would we want to go and mess with it? Especially when our system, our superannuation system that is known as being one of the best in the world. It is really admired, respected, and there are a lot of other countries really looking into what we do and seeing how they can incorporate it in their own country. So let's keep moving on this because whilst I like to talk about the problem, I also like to talk about solutions, ideas, and strategies. So what can we do? Well, obviously, number one, we've got to stay informed. This policy is still a proposal. It's not actually law yet. You've got to go and talk to your financial planner and your accountant sooner rather than later. Talking to them about super splitting. Is this something that you can do? Depending on how many members you've got and obviously how much money and if your partner is in your superannuation. Looking at valuations, self-managed super fund valuations. Looking at liquidity strategies, particularly, looking at making sure that you've got cash and perhaps the strategy now changes so that you're not making new investments, you're perhaps piling up cash and letting it sit in the self-managed super fund. Also looking about tax planning, looking at potentially shares, Australian shares with franking credits that can help reduce that tax. Or, if you're over preservation age, which for most of us is around about 60 or above, perhaps you need to look at taking some money out of superannuation. But of course, don't go and do that without professional and formal advice from your accountant and your financial planner. You also may want to look at maybe looking at some more liquid assets. If your self-managed super fund is predominantly filled up with, property, like commercial property or residential property that's not liquid, perhaps you need to start including other assets that you can actually sell $100,000 worth or $10,000 worth or, whatever you need to potentially fund these things so you're not ever backed into a situation where you have to sell the whole entire property. The other thing you want to be talking about your financial planner with is looking at assets for your, investment strategy, your retirement strategy that are perhaps less volatile so that you don't need to worry about a spike in volatility where it pushes you temporarily over that $3 million threshold, triggering this tax for you. Perhaps you need to look at more boring, stable, less volatile investments, perhaps. This really is important to it pays to be prepared. And, this is not a time to panic, but it's certainly not a time to stay silent because this is grossly unfair to all of us. So, you pick up the phone, write a letter to your MP. Policies like this shouldn't ever be rushed. And I feel like this is being rushed through at a disturbing, concerning rate. So as I wrap up today's episode, and I think I've literally spat all over my microphone because I've gotten so passionate about this, whether your super balance is $30,000 or $3 million, this proposed change should really concern you. This may look like a rich person's problem, but if it is passed, it is going to eventually impact all of us. Furthermore, this isn't just about tax. It's about changing the rules of the game, shifting the burden, and punishing the very behaviours that we're actually trying to encourage, like long-term planning, financial independence, growing your future wealth responsibly so that we don't end up on the government demanding an age pension every single year. So I'm sorry if I've gotten a little bit passionate. I'm sorry if I've offended you with my swearing. I promise you I wasn't trying to scare you, but I want to empower you. I want to help you understand what is happening and why your voice and your plan matters more than ever before. I don't want you to wake up one day and go, gosh, what's this tax? Why am I now being asked to pay this tax? What's this all about? And think, why didn't Canna ever tell me about this? Well, I am. I'm telling you right now so that we can do something and hopefully get it shut down for good. Now, if you are one of those very fortunate people who does have $3 million or more in super, can I strongly recommend getting advice, not advice from an influencer or from listening to a podcast like this or reading a blog post. Go and get personal advice, professional advice from your accountant and your financial planner as soon as possible. Whilst this may not necessarily be passed, it may be delayed for a little bit and passed, say in 6 months' time or a year's time, it is still worth getting proactive advice so that you can make any recommended changes smoothly while being completely informed and knowing what is best for you and your goals, and of course, all the costs and risks involved. So, all right, let's keep the pressure for a smart, successful superannuation policy as it should be. And as well, continue to invest with purpose, keep an eye on our economy and what's right for everyone, and support productivity and innovation in this country. Now, as always, as I wrap up today's episode, keep that financial fire burning bright within. This is Sugar Mama's Fireplay.